The afternoon sun streamed through the airport windows as passengers lined up to board the flight to Los Angeles. Tom had been working as a flight attendant for over 15 years, and this route was one he knew well. Standing near the boarding gate, he watched people file past, businessmen in crisp suits, families with excited children, and tourists ready for California adventures. As the first-class passengers began boarding, Tom noticed a tall man hanging back from the crowd. The guy wore faded jeans with a few small holes at the knees, a simple black t-shirt that had seen better days, and worn-out boots. A baseball cap pulled low shadowed his face, and his beard looked like it hadn't been trimmed in weeks. A battered backpack hung from one shoulder. "First class now boarding," announced the gate agent, and to Tom's surprise, the scruffy-looking man stepped forward, ticket in hand. The gate agent glanced at the ticket, then at the passenger, a slight frown crossing her face before she forced a smile. "Have a pleasant flight, sir," she said, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been for the well-dressed businessman who had boarded moments before. From his position near the aircraft door, Tom greeted each passenger with a practiced smile. When the bearded man approached, Tom couldn't help but notice his calm, steady gaze and the gentle way he moved, almost like he was trying not to take up too much space despite his tall frame. "Good afternoon," the man said quietly, his voice warm and surprisingly gentle. "Seat 3A is to your right," Tom replied, his smile a bit stiff. He watched as the passenger made his way to his seat, wondering if maybe the guy had been upgraded or used miles for the ticket. He certainly didn't look like he belonged in first class. Inside the cabin, Lisa, another flight attendant, raised her eyebrows at Tom as the bearded passenger settled into his seat. She leaned close and whispered, "Looks like someone took a wrong turn." The man carefully placed his backpack under the seat in front of him, pulled out a dog-eared script with handwritten notes in the margins, and began reading quietly. Unlike the other first-class passengers who immediately asked for pre-departure drinks or complained about the cabin temperature, he seemed content just to sit there. As boarding continued, Tom noticed how the other crew members were fawning over a famous social media influencer in 2C and the CEO of a tech company in 4B. Meanwhile, the scruffy guy in 3A was practically invisible to them. When Lisa offered drinks to the first-class cabin, she started with the CEO, then the influencer, working her way through all the well-dressed passengers before finally turning to the bearded man. "Water, please," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you for asking." Lisa nodded curtly and moved away quickly, as if worried he might ask for something more. Tom watched this from the galley and felt a twinge of unease. Sure, the guy didn't look like typical first class, but something about the passenger's calm demeanor suggested there was more to him than appearances. As the flight prepared for takeoff, Tom overheard two other crew members whispering near the forward galley. "Did you see the guy in 3A?" one asked. "Probably used all his savings for that ticket. Or maybe his rich girlfriend bought it for him," the other replied with a smirk. "Did you notice his accent? Not from around here, that's for sure." Tom busied himself with the pre-flight checks, trying to ignore the comments, but they continued throughout the safety demonstration. He noticed how the bearded passenger paid careful attention to the safety instructions, while most others scrolled through their phones. Once airborne, the conversation in the galley grew louder. The crew seemed to have decided the quiet passenger was fair game for their jokes and assumptions. Tom heard comments about the man's ethnicity, guesses about how he could afford the ticket, and snide remarks about his clothes. Meanwhile, their subject remained oblivious, completely absorbed in his reading, occasionally making notes with a pencil he kept tucked behind his ear. There was something almost peaceful about him, a stark contrast to the judgmental whispers surrounding him. As Tom prepared the drink cart, he found himself wondering about the story behind the unassuming man in seat 3A. Little did he know, everyone on this flight was about to learn an unexpected lesson about appearances and the danger of quick judgments. The plane reached cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Tom started preparing the drink cart while the other flight attendants gathered in the galley, their voices low but not quite low enough. "I bet he won that ticket in some radio contest," said Lisa, glancing toward seat 3A. "No way he paid for it himself." "Or maybe he's one of those travel hackers," chimed in Dave, a senior crew member with silver-streaked hair. "You know, the ones who game the system with credit card points." Tom tried to focus on arranging the glasses neatly on the cart, but the conversation was hard to ignore. He'd seen this kind of talk before, quick judgments based on nothing but appearances. "Did you notice his eyes?" Lisa continued, lowering her voice further. "I'm thinking he might be part Asian or something. Probably works in one of those tech support call centers." Dave snorted. "Yeah, and now he's pretending to be something he's not. Did you see that ratty backpack? I almost told him to put it in the overhead bin. Doesn't exactly scream first class." The galley became a bubble of hushed laughter and knowing looks. Tom felt increasingly uncomfortable as the comments shifted from mild assumptions to outright disrespect. "I'll take the right aisle," announced Lisa, grabbing a stack of hot towels. "You guys can handle Mr. Goodwill Shopper over there." Tom wheeled the cart out, feeling a knot in his stomach. As he served the CEO in 4B, who barely looked up from his laptop to acknowledge the drink placed before him, Tom found himself watching the bearded passenger from the corner of his eye. The man sat quietly, completely absorbed in the pages of his script. His fingers occasionally traced lines of dialogue, and his lips moved slightly as if testing how the words might sound. There was something methodical and thoughtful about his concentration. When Tom finally reached 3A, the passenger looked up with a genuine smile. "Just water is fine, thanks," he said, his voice carrying a gentle warmth that caught Tom off guard. "Any ice with that?" Tom asked, finding himself returning the smile despite the gossip he just heard. "No, room temperature is perfect. Thank you for asking." The man carefully moved his script to make space for the drink. Tom noticed the pages were heavily annotated with handwritten notes, not the behavior of someone who'd stumbled into first class by accident. As he placed the glass down, he caught a glimpse of what looked like dialogue highlighting and character notes in the margins. Back in the galley, the comments continued. "He didn't even order a proper drink," Lisa said with an eye roll. "Just water. Probably afraid of the bill." "Maybe he's never been on a plane before," added Dave. "Did you see how closely he watched the safety demo? Like it was the most fascinating thing ever." A younger flight attendant named Kelly joined in, though she seemed less comfortable with the conversation. "I don't know, guys. He seems nice enough." "Nice doesn't belong here," Dave replied, gesturing toward the first-class cabin. "These seats cost thousands. I've got passengers back in economy who are dressed better and probably make more money than him." Tom busied himself with restocking napkins, wanting no part in the conversation but feeling increasingly bothered by it. Through the galley curtain, he could see the passenger helping an elderly woman across the aisle who had dropped her reading glasses. The simple act of kindness stood in stark contrast to the cruel assumptions being made just a few feet away. As the meal service began, Tom noticed how the crew gave minimal attention to 3A while lavishing it on the other passengers. They'd ask the CEO if he wanted a warm-up on his coffee before it was even half empty, yet the bearded man had to request a refill on his water after his glass had sat empty for 20 minutes. Despite this, the passenger remained unfailingly polite, thanking the crew for every small service with the same genuine smile. Not once did he complain or show any sign that he noticed the difference in treatment. During the main meal service, Lisa accidentally skipped offering bread to 3A, and when Dave brought the meal options, he mentioned only the less popular choice to the bearded passenger, saving the premium selection for others. Tom found himself growing increasingly uncomfortable with his colleague's behavior. There was something about the quiet dignity of the passenger that made the crew's pettiness seem all the smaller by comparison. As he watched the man carefully fold his napkin after finishing his meal, Tom wondered what might happen if his coworkers knew who they were really serving. The flight hit a patch of turbulence, causing the cabin to shake. Tom watched as several passengers gripped their armrests, their knuckles turning white. The captain's voice came over the intercom, assuring everyone that they were simply passing through some rough air and would be back to smooth flying shortly. Tom noticed that the bearded man in 3A remained calm, seemingly unbothered by the bumpy ride. While other passengers frantically pressed their call buttons, he simply continued reading his script, occasionally making notes with a pencil. "Looks like Mr. Goodwill isn't used to flying in the front of the plane," Dave whispered to Lisa as they hurried to respond to the call buttons. "He doesn't know he's allowed to be demanding." Tom approached 3A with a fresh napkin to replace the one that had fallen during the turbulence. As he bent down, he got a closer look at what the passenger was reading. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, arrows connecting thoughts, and highlighted sections of dialogue. This wasn't casual reading material, it looked like serious work. "Thank you," the man said, looking up with that same warm smile. "Are you doing okay with all this bouncing around?" The question caught Tom off guard. In his 15 years of flying, passengers rarely asked about his well-being. "I'm used to it," Tom replied, finding himself smiling back. "Turbulence is just bumps in the road, but 30,000 feet up." The man chuckled softly. "That's a good way to think about it. Mind if I use that sometime?" Before Tom could respond, a loud crash came from a few rows back. A young boy of about 6 had knocked over his orange juice, and the liquid was spreading across the aisle. The boy's face crumpled as his mother frantically tried to mop up the mess with cocktail napkins. "I'll get some towels," Tom said, turning toward the galley. When he returned with a stack of paper towels, he was surprised to see the bearded passenger already kneeling in the aisle, helping the mother clean up while talking softly to the upset child. "Hey buddy, you know what? I spill things all the time," the man was saying. "Just last week, I knocked over an entire coffee pot on set, at work. Made a much bigger mess than this." The boy looked up, his tears subsiding. "Really?" "Really," the passenger nodded, his smile genuine. "And I'm a grown-up, so what's my excuse?" By the time Tom reached them, the boy was giggling, disaster averted. The passenger stood up, his jeans now sporting a damp orange spot where he knelt in the spill. "Sorry about that," the mother said to him. "Your pants?" "Don't worry about it," he replied. "They're just jeans. They've seen worse." Tom handed over the paper towels and watched as the passenger returned to his seat without making a fuss about his stained clothes. Most first-class passengers would have demanded compensation or at least made their displeasure known. Back in the galley, Lisa had witnessed the whole scene. "Can you believe that?" she said to Dave. "Crawling around on the floor like a janitor. Guess that's closer to his real job anyway." Tom felt a flash of annoyance. He was just helping out the kid. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you defend the weird ones, Tom? I thought we were on the same page here." Before Tom could respond, the call button for 3A lit up, the first time the passenger had used it during the entire flight. "I'll get it," Tom said quickly, not wanting Lisa to take the call. When he reached 3A, the passenger pointed to his half-finished meal. "I'm actually full, but I was wondering if it would be possible to give my dessert to that boy back there. The one who spilled his drink. Might make him feel better about the whole thing." Tom blinked, surprised by the request. "Of course I can do that." "Thanks," the man said. "And if possible, maybe don't mention it came from me. No need to make a big deal about it." As Tom delivered the chocolate cake to the delighted boy, he glanced back at 3A. The passenger had returned to his script, seemingly content. Something about the man's simple kindness and his desire to remain anonymous in it struck Tom deeply. The contrast between the passenger's behavior and that of his colleagues was becoming impossible to ignore. While they continued to judge and dismiss based on appearances, the man in 3A moved through the world with a quiet dignity that spoke volumes about his character. When Tom passed the galley, he overheard Dave and Lisa still gossiping, but for the first time in years, he felt ashamed to be associated with their behavior. As the flight continued, he found himself wondering what else they might be wrong about when it came to the mysterious man in seat 3A. The flight was about halfway to Los Angeles when things began to change. Tom was restocking the beverage cart when he noticed a young teen, maybe 14 or 15, fidgeting in his economy seat, repeatedly glancing toward the first-class cabin. The boy whispered something to his mom, who shook her head firmly. Not 5 minutes later, Tom spotted the same teen standing hesitantly at the divider curtain between cabins, a notebook clutched in his hands. "Can I help you?" Tom asked, approaching the boy. I think that's Keanu Reeves in first class," the boy said, his voice trembling with excitement. "My mom doesn't believe me, but I'm sure it's him. I'm a huge fan." Tom glanced over at the bearded passenger in 3A, who was still absorbed in his script. For the first time, he really looked, at the man's face, beyond the casual clothes and the unkempt beard. "I don't think passengers are supposed to," Tom began, but the boy had already slipped past him. "Excuse me," the teen said, his voice cracking as he approached seat 3A. Are you Keanu Reeves? The cabin seemed to go completely silent. The passenger looked up, slightly startled, then a warm smile spread across his face. He set his script aside. Yeah, that's me, he said simply. What's your name? Peter, the boy replied, his face lighting up like a Christmas tree. I can't believe it's really you. I've seen all your movies. The Matrix is my favorite film of all time. Tom stood frozen in the aisle, watching as the man, Keanu Reeves, one of the biggest movie stars in the world, chatted with the teen as if they were old friends. So that's why the script had looked so professional. It wasn't some aspiring writer's draft. It was probably his next blockbuster movie. Would you mind signing this? Peter asked, holding out his notebook with shaking hands. Not at all, Reeves replied, taking the notebook. He asked Peter about himself, listening intently as the boy explained how the actor's films had inspired him to take martial arts classes. The commotion caught the attention of other passengers. A woman gasped audibly. A businessman who had ignored Reeves earlier was now staring openly. Whispers rippled through the cabin. That's Keanu Reeves. The John Wick guy. Neo from The Matrix. Dave appeared at Tom's side, his face a mask of confusion. What's going on? The passenger in 3A, Tom said quietly. It's Keanu Reeves. Dave's jaw literally dropped. You're kidding me. Lisa pushed past them both, her expression shifting from disbelief to horror as she realized the truth. She had spent the last 2 hours making fun of one of Hollywood's most beloved actors. Oh my God, she whispered. I've been. She couldn't even finish her sentence. By now, other passengers had begun approaching, phones in hand. Reeves graciously spoke with each one, he even standing to take photos with a few, though he seemed a bit uncomfortable with all the attention. Tom watched as his fellow crew members transformed before his eyes. Dave, who had been dismissive and rude, was now hovering nearby with an eager smile. Lisa had disappeared into the galley, but Tom could see her through the curtain, frantically fixing her hair and makeup. When she emerged, she was carrying a fresh glass of water with lemon, exactly what Reeves had politely requested an hour ago and never received. Mr. Reeves, she said, her voice honey-sweet as she placed the water in front of him. I'm so sorry for the wait. Is there anything else I can get for you? Reeves thanked her with the same genuine smile he'd offered when she'd been cold to him. This is perfect, thank you. The flight's captain came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a special guest on board today. On behalf of the entire crew, we'd like to welcome Mr. Keanu Reeves. A round of applause filled the cabin. Reeves gave a small, slightly embarrassed wave, clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention. Tom couldn't help but notice how Reeves was exactly the same person he'd been before everyone knew who he was, kind, humble, and genuine. The only things that had changed were the attitudes of those around him. The teen, Peter, returned to his seat in economy, clutching his signed notebook like a treasure, his face glowing with excitement as he showed his mom. Meanwhile, in the galley, Tom overheard Dave urgently whispering to the other crew members, "Act normal. Don't make it obvious we didn't recognize him. The airline will kill us if this gets out." Too late, Tom thought. The damage was already done. The question now was whether Reeves would call them out on their behavior, or if he would continue to show the same grace he'd displayed since boarding the plane. Word spread through the airplane like wildfire. Keanu Reeves was on board, sitting in seat 3A, and had been there all along in his simple clothes and cap. The energy in the cabin shifted dramatically. Passengers who hadn't paid any attention to him before now strained their necks to catch a glimpse. Some pretended they'd known who he was from the start. Tom stood near the galley, watching this transformation with a mix of fascination and discomfort. The man in seat 3A hadn't changed one bit. He was still the same polite, humble person who'd boarded the plane hours ago. But everyone around him had become different people entirely. An older woman across the aisle tapped Reeves on the shoulder. "I just wanted to say, I saw how those flight attendants were treating you before they knew who you were. It was shameful." Reeves looked surprised, then gave a small shrug. "It's really not a big deal." "It absolutely is," the woman insisted. "I've been watching. They ignored you, they whispered about you, they treated you differently than everyone else." A businessman 2 rows up turned around. "She's right. I noticed it too. The tall guy with the gray hair kept making faces whenever he had to serve you. Tom felt his face burn with second-hand embarrassment. Dave had indeed been making faces, rolling his eyes and smirking whenever he thought passengers weren't looking. More people joined the conversation, sharing their observations of how the crew had behaved. Tom was shocked by how much the passengers had noticed. The businessman mentioned how Lisa had deliberately skipped Reeves during the warm towel service. Someone else pointed out how she offered him only the pasta option when other passengers were given a choice of pasta or chicken. The only decent one was him, the older woman said, pointing to Tom. At least he treated everyone the same. Tom hadn't expected to be singled out, and he didn't feel he deserved the praise. Sure, he hadn't actively mistreated Reeves, but he hadn't stepped in to stop his colleagues either. The plane hit another patch of turbulence, and the seatbelt sign dinged on. The passengers reluctantly returned to their seats, but the buzz of conversation continued. In the galley, panic had set in among the crew. "Do you think he'll report us?" Lisa whispered, her face pale. "I could lose my job." "Just act normal," Dave hissed. "He doesn't seem like the type to complain." "You don't know that," Lisa shot back. "Celebrities can be the worst when it comes to special treatment." Tom stepped into the galley. "Maybe we should just apologize." Both Lisa and Dave looked at him like he'd suggested jumping out of the plane. "Are you crazy?" Lisa asked. "That would be admitting we did something wrong." "Didn't we, though?" Tom asked quietly. Before either could respond, the pilot's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into Los Angeles. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." Tom returned to the first-class cabin and found Reeves carefully putting his script into his backpack. Their eyes met briefly, and to Tom's surprise, Reeves gave him that same warm smile he'd been offering all flight, before and after being recognized. Tom felt a strange mix of emotions. Here was a man who'd been judged, mocked, and poorly treated based solely on his appearance, yet he showed no sign of anger or resentment. If anything, he seemed slightly embarrassed by all the attention now being directed his way. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, approached from a few rows back, clutching a paper napkin. "My mom says you're famous," she said matter-of-factly. "Could you please sign this for me? I don't know any of your movies because Mom says I'm too young, but she says you're very nice." Reeves chuckled softly. "Your mom sounds very smart." He carefully signed the napkin and handed it back. "What's your name?" "Jenny," the girl replied. "Well, Jenny, it's very nice to meet you. And thank you for coming to say hello, even though you don't know my movies." The girl beamed and returned to her seat, proudly showing off her autograph. Tom secured the cabin for landing, all too aware of the whispers that followed him. Some passengers gave him cold looks, having witnessed how his colleagues had behaved. Others gave approving nods, apparently grouping him with the good flight attendants. Neither reaction felt deserved. As the plane began its descent toward Los Angeles, Tom couldn't help wondering what would happen when they landed. Would Reeves file a complaint? Would there be consequences for the crew's behavior? And why did a man with every reason to be angry seem so at peace with how he'd been treated? The plane began its final approach to Los Angeles. Through the windows, the sprawling city glittered in the late afternoon sun. The captain announced they would be landing in about 15 minutes and thanked everyone for flying with them. In the galley, the chief flight attendant, Nancy, was having an urgent conversation with Lisa and Dave. Tom could see their worried expressions and hear snippets of their hurried whispers. "What exactly did you say to him?" Nancy asked, her voice tight. Lisa twisted her hands nervously. "Nothing directly to him, but we may have made some comments." "Some very unprofessional comments," Tom added, surprising himself with his boldness. Nancy shot him a look, then sighed deeply. "This is a PR disaster waiting to happen. Do you have any idea how bad this could be if he posts about it online? He has millions of followers." The 3 other flight attendants stared at their shoes, nobody wanting to meet Nancy's stern gaze. "I need to address this before we land," Nancy finally said. "I'll talk to him." Tom watched as Nancy straightened her uniform, put on her most professional smile, and walked towards seat 3A. He couldn't hear what she said, but he could see her gesturing apologetically while Reeves listened attentively. After a minute or two, Nancy returned to the galley, her expression unreadable. "Well, Lisa asked anxiously. What did he say? Is he going to file a complaint? Nancy shook her head slowly. He said, and I quote, "Everyone has bad days. It's really not a big deal." Then he asked if I was doing okay because I seemed stressed. There was a moment of stunned silence. He asked if you were okay. Dave repeated incredulously. Nancy nodded, a hint of embarrassment in her eyes. After how he was treated, he was concerned about me. Said something about how flying can be stressful for everyone, passengers and crew alike. Tom wasn't surprised. It fit with everything he'd observed about Reeves during the flight. His patience, his kindness to the child who spilled his drink, his lack of entitlement despite being a major celebrity. He did request one thing though, Nancy added. The other flight attendants tensed. He asked if we could please not make a big announcement when we land. Said he'd rather just deplane normally without any fuss. Lisa let out a relieved breath. That's it? No complaints to the airline? No demands? None, Nancy confirmed. But that doesn't excuse what happened here today. We'll be discussing this further after the flight. The plane touched down with a gentle bump and began taxiing toward the gate. As the passengers prepared to deplane, Tom noticed Lisa hovering near seat 3A, clearly working up the courage to say something. "Mr. Reeves," she finally said, her voice barely audible above the sound of seatbelts unbuckling and overhead bins opening. "I just wanted to apologize for my behavior earlier. It was unprofessional and unkind." Tom moved closer, pretending to check a nearby overhead bin while listening to the conversation. Reeves looked up at her, his expression gentle. "Hey, no worries. Flying can be stressful for everyone." "That's very kind of you, but..." Lisa's voice cracked slightly. "The truth is, I judged you based on how you looked, and that was wrong of me. Really wrong." Reeves seemed genuinely touched by her honesty. "Thanks for saying that. It takes courage to admit when we've made a mistake." Lisa nodded, wiping quickly at her eyes. "It won't happen again with any passenger." "Then something good came out of it," Reeves replied with that same warm smile. As passengers began to file off the plane, several stopped to shake Reeves' hand or ask for a quick photo. He obliged each one patiently, though Tom could tell he was uncomfortable with all the attention. Dave had positioned himself near the exit, clearly hoping for his own chance to make amends. When Reeves finally reached the door, backpack slung over one shoulder, Dave cleared his throat. "Sir, I also want to apologize for my behavior. It was completely unacceptable." Reeves paused, studying Dave's face for a moment. "Thanks, man. I appreciate that." Then, instead of simply accepting the apology and moving on, he extended his hand. Dave looked surprised but reached out to shake it. "Thank you for being so understanding." "We're all just trying our best," Reeves said with a small shrug. "Some days are better than others." As he stepped off the plane, Tom couldn't help but feel he'd witnessed something rare and valuable, not just a celebrity being recognized, but a human being showing extraordinary grace in the face of prejudice and rudeness. The lesson wasn't lost on him or, he suspected, on any of his colleagues. The terminal was crowded as passengers streamed out of the gate. Tom had finished his duties on the plane and was now walking through the airport, his small rolling suitcase trailing behind him. He wasn't scheduled to fly back until tomorrow morning, which meant a night in the airline's designated hotel near LAX. Up ahead, he spotted a small crowd gathered. At the center stood Keanu Reeves, patiently taking photos with fans who had recognized him in the terminal. Unlike many celebrities Tom had seen over the years, Reeves didn't have bodyguards pushing people away or handlers rushing him through the crowd. He simply stood there, giving each person a moment of his time with the same genuine smile he'd shown on the plane. A few feet away, Tom noticed Lisa watching the scene, her expression a mix of shame and wonder. "I can't believe how nice he's being," she said when Tom approached. "After how we treated him." "I know," Tom replied. "Makes you think, doesn't it? I've been so focused on the important passengers, the ones in fancy clothes with expensive watches, that I stopped seeing people as, well, people." Lisa's voice was quiet, her usual confidence gone. "I don't like what that says about me." Before Tom could respond, he spotted Dave standing near the baggage claim, deep in conversation with Nancy. The chief flight attendant's expression was serious, and Dave kept nodding, looking thoroughly chastised. "Think they'll write us up?" Lisa asked, following Tom's gaze. Maybe, probably should, honestly. Lisa nodded slowly. Yeah, might be a good wake-up call. As the crowd around Reeves began to disperse, Tom saw an older man approach the actor. The man wasn't seeking an autograph. Instead, he seemed to be apologizing for the commotion. Tom couldn't hear what was said, but he saw Reeves shake his head and place a hand briefly on the man's shoulder in a gesture of reassurance. You know, Tom said, I've flown with a lot of famous people over the years. Actors, musicians, politicians. Most of them make sure everyone knows exactly who they are the second they step on the plane. And he did the opposite, Lisa finished. Tried to blend in, didn't ask for special treatment. Didn't even complain when he had every right to. A young woman who had been on their flight walked past, giving them a cold look. Word had clearly spread about how the crew had behaved. Tom felt a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. I keep thinking about what would have happened if no one had recognized him, Lisa said. He would have just gotten off the plane, and we would have gone on treating the next casually dressed passenger exactly the same way. Not anymore, Tom said firmly. At least not me. Nancy appeared beside them, her face tired but resolved. Meeting at the hotel in an hour. The airline wants statements from all of us. How bad is it? Lisa asked anxiously. Honestly, several passengers have already posted about it online. It's not good, Nancy sighed. But Mr. Reeves told the gate agent he doesn't want to file a complaint, said everyone deserves a second chance. As Nancy walked away, Tom caught one last glimpse of Reeves heading toward the exit, baseball cap pulled low again, blending into the crowd as best a 6'1" movie star could. You know what the craziest part is? Tom said, if he'd boarded wearing designer clothes or brought an entourage or demanded special treatment, we would have fallen all over ourselves to help him. But because he was humble and didn't show off his wealth, we treated him like he didn't matter, Lisa finished. The lesson wasn't lost on either of them. 3 months later, Tom was working a flight from Chicago to Seattle. As passengers boarded, he noticed a young man in worn jeans and a faded hoodie making his way to first class. The passenger beside him raised an eyebrow, clearly judging the casual attire. Tom smiled warmly at the young man. Good afternoon, sir. Can I get you anything before we take off? The passenger looked surprised, then grateful. Just water would be great, thanks. As Tom turned to get the water, he caught Lisa's eye across the cabin. She gave him a small nod, a shared acknowledgement of how much had changed. The lesson from that flight with Keanu Reeves had stuck with them both. It wasn't just about treating celebrities well regardless of how they dressed. It was about treating everyone with the same respect and kindness, no matter their appearance or social status. Sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected teachers, even on an ordinary flight from New York to Los Angeles.